2024 is behind us, giving way to 2025, and that concludes another year of fights. While the year had multiple highlights and great fights, there was a lot of fights during the year. A lot. And you probably missed a few good ones here and there. And since there's still a week left until we have fights back, I have compiled a list of some of the hidden gems 2024 had for us buried on the prelims. These are 25 fights from 2024 to start 2025. Before beginning, let's establish some things. All of these fights should have happened on 2024. They are UFC fights and they need to have aired during the prelims. It doesn't matter if it was a pay-per-view or a fight night. They're also ordered chronologically, so this is not from like worst to best. This is just in the order they happened. With that out of the way, let's begin. Number 1, Marcus McGee versus Gaston Bolaños, UFC Fight Night, Ankalaev versus Walker, January 13. And the first event of the year. After a successful debut against JP Bays, McGee comes back against Peruvian striker Gaston Bolaños. More of a choky performance, it was still an exciting fight with McGee putting on a show against a tough Bolaños, displaying his footwork, counters, and combinations. Number 2, Jimmy Flick versus Malcolm Gordon, UFC 297, January 20. First pay-per-view of the year, the very first prelim had this bout between flyweight grapplers. Gordon came out like a house on fire and it was on Flick to weather the storm to mount the comeback. Number 3, Ramon Taveras versus Seri Sidi, UFC 297, January 20. Also on that same pay-per-view, we had a Contender Series rematch after a controversial stoppage on their first meeting that many thought was too early. Taveras came back with a quick knockout of his own in his next Contender Series performance, and everything was set for a rematch under the UFC banner. Sidi came as the winner of their first encounter and had a home ground advantage. Taveras had to prove a point. In a very back-and-forth striking bout, Sidi put on the pressure and output, while the Southpaw Taveras played the sleek outboxer. Number 4, Garett Armfield vs Brad Katona, UFC 297, January 20. Yet another one from 297. The only two-time tough winner, Katona took on the exciting striker Armfield. Katona is more than fine riding a wrestling-heavy victory, but he has shown numerous times that he's not afraid at all of throwing down. Armfield showed off his athleticism and takedown defense to keep it on the feet, and used his crafty striking against Katona pushing the pace. Number 5, Charles Johnson vs Asad Maksum, UFC Fight Night Dolidze vs Imavov, February 3. Veteran Charles Johnson takes on undefeated prospect Kazakh Asad Maksum. Maksum was sharp and dangerous out of the gate in all areas, but Johnson showed his own well-roundedness and the elusive consistency that would be the beginning of his current streak to win this fight. Number 6, Raoni Barcelos vs Cristian Quiñones, UFC Fight Night Moreno vs Royval 2, February 24. Crafty veteran Barcelos was 1-4 in his last fight coming into this fight. The exciting and wild Quiñones was also coming off a loss. Quiñones was aggressive early but showed that he was more than willing to wrestle and grapple with the accomplished Brazilian. Barcelos had to overcome not only a 90 years age gap, but also his shoulder popping out during the first round, showing tremendous grit. Number 7, Chad Angeliker vs Charalampos Grigoriou, UFC Fight Night Tuivasa vs Taibura, March 16. 38 years old on a 2-fight skid, Angeliker has his back against the wall. Opposite to him, Longos MMA athletic prospect Grigoriou. Yet another fight where the veteran had to turn the tides as the younger grappler was able to get his fight on the second half of the first round. The Canadian was able to turn into a showcase late into the fight with leg-crippling leg kicks and incredible shot selection. Number 8, Danny Silva vs Josh Culibao, UFC Fight Night Tuivasa vs Taibura, March 16. One of my favorites on this list. Weight miss aside, Silva had a tough task on his UFC debut against staple of the division Culibao. Seems like Danny has a thing for wars, because after having one of the best fights in Contender Series history against Angel Pacheco, he had another banger in his UFC debut. Culibao faced adversity out of the gate, but he was not dissuaded, moving on the outside and landing shots against Silva, who was looking to land power shots and find takedowns. With Culibao looking like the fresher fighter, it all came down to the third round. Number 9, Jan Matsumoto vs Dan Argueta, UFC Fight Night Allen vs Curtis 2, April 6. Argueta was looking to impose his wrestling as soon as the fight began, but Matsumoto kept finding answers during scrambles. On the feet, Matsumoto had the technical edge, but Argueta didn't back down, turning the fight into a well-rounded war where conditioning ended up being key. Number 10, Miktibek Orolbai vs Elbas Brenner, UFC 301, May 4. This was a battle between the high prospect in Orolbai against Brenner, who has been thriving as an underdog and with the home advantage in Rio. From the very beginning, Brenner looked off, with Orolbai landing big strikes and succeeding getting the fight to the ground, but Brenner once again showed up his otherworldly toughness and heart to get reversals and compete for top position in an extremely grueling fight. Number 11, Felipe Lima vs Mohamed Naimov, UFC Fight Night, Whitaker vs Aliskerov, June 22. Highly touted prospect Felipe Lima makes his UFC debut on short notice and a weight class up. Opposite to him was Naimov, who made his debut under similar conditions and was perfect on the UFC so far at 3-0. Lima wasted no time showing he belonged in the UFC, but he got stuck in bottom position a few times against the larger Naimov, so it was on him to be aggressive and take the initiative. Number 12, Rey Zuruya vs Carlos Hernandez, UFC 303, June 29. Another prospect versus veteran style matchup. Blue chip prospect and former wrestling standout Rey Zuruya looks to implement his dangerous blend of mat wrestling and submission against Contender Series product Carlos Hernandez. The Japanese was able to get his grappling going, but Hernandez surprised it, staying safe and being able to scramble with the younger fighter every way the fight went. The third round saw a tired Zuruya facing real adversity for the first time in his career. Number 13. Charles Johnson vs Joshua Ban. UFC Fight Night Namajunas vs Cortez, July 13. Johnson's second appearance on this list. As we talked about earlier, it looked like this year Inner G would finally put his skill set and mental game together. Opposite to him, we had yet another undefeated prospect and one of the youngest fighters in the roster, exciting striker Joshua Ban. Ban was quick to pressure, looking to put his counters and combinations together, but Johnson was able to keep up with his leg variety and movement on the outside in a very exciting fight. Number 14, Nathaniel Wood vs Daniel Pineda, UFC 304, July 27. We talk a lot about prospect, and that's exactly the nickname of Nathaniel Wood, who faced off against veteran of over 40 fights, Daniel Pineda. The ungodly toughness on Pineda was the perfect foil for Wood to show off his skills, but as the smaller fighter, he needed to be careful in grappling situations against a legit and experienced black belt. Number 15, Kutateladze vs Buchenik, UFC Fight Night, Sanhagen vs Nurmagomedov, August 3. Sorry if I sound like I'm repeating myself, but we have yet another prospect versus veteran outing. They just tend to generate a lot of great fights. Buchenik came into this fight as a former Cage Warrior featherweight champion, Kutateladze coming off a loss in his brutal banger against Elvis Brenner, who we already mentioned earlier in this list, and was out for more than a year. Buchenik looked every part of the new hot commodity early in this fight, but agreed Kutateladze fought hard and smart to turn things around in a very competitive bout. Number 16, Gabriel Santos vs Ji Jia, UFC Fight Night, Burns vs Brady, September 7. Gabriel Santos impressed with his short notice debut against top fighter Lerone Murphy, but was in need of his first win inside the octagon after losing to David Onama. Opposite to him, two-time participant and one-time winner of the Road to UFC tournament, Ji Jia. This action-filled Southpaw vs Southpaw fight matched up the technique and dynamic of the Brazilian against the toughness and raw athleticism of the Chinese fighter. Number 17, Andre Lima vs Felipe Dos Santos, UFC Fight Night, Burns vs Brady, September 7. Prospect versus prospect action in the flyweight division, with both being Brazilian. A bit of a slower one, with Lima showing his grappling superiority, but it was still a high-level bout between dudes with a bright future in the division. Number 18, Joshua Ban vs Edgar Chairez, UFC 306, September 14. Ban has his second appearance in this list, and he comes with a vengeance. Chairez was looking to put on a show for the Mexican fans at UFC Noche, and he was giving the younger Ban a lot of trouble with his length and brutal leg kicks, but Ban reminded everyone how talented and skilled he is, getting back into the fight to turn the tides on his favor. Number 19, Norma Dumont vs Irene Aldana, UFC 306, September 14. After a very disappointing bid for the title, Aldana bounced back in one of the best fights of 2023 against Carol Hossa in a fight in which she had to overcome a bunch of damage to her legs. Dumont, the Sanda practitioner, was looking to spoil the night for Aldana in front of her audience during the Mexican-themed night. Another one that's more of a showcase, with Dumont showing off her footwork and defense while constantly dealing damage to Aldana, including one of the worst cuts you'll see this year. Number 20, Jan Matsumoto vs Brad Katona, UFC Fight Night, Hernandez vs Pereira, October 19. Second appearance by both guys on this list. Katona once again showing that if the takedowns aren't there, he will get his hand dirty with the boxing, and a Matsumoto who showed up to scrap just like he did against Argueta. Just an action-filled back-and-forth fight with Matsumoto again showing his defensive grappling chops. Number 21, Mateusz Rambecki vs Miktibek Orolbai, UFC 308, October 26. The second appearance by Orolbai, again a Rambecki looking to bounce back from his first UFC loss at the hands of Carlos Diego Ferreira. This one is just a blood and guts war for all the Just Bleed fans, as both wrestlers were incredibly aggressive anywhere the fight took place, and with both looking too tough for their own good. Number 22, Charles Jourdain vs Victor Henry, UFC Fight Night, Moreno vs Alvasi, November 2. Jourdain drops down to 135 and he's welcomed by well-rounded veteran Victor Henry. An exciting fight that had a bit of everything, with Victor putting on the pressure and Jourdain moving on the outside looking to land his dynamic offense. The grappling would be the deciding factor at the end. Number 23, David Onama vs Roberto Romero, UFC 309, November 16. Romero takes the fight on short notice and makes his debut on the undercard of a pay-per-view against Onama, who is no stranger to crazy fights. The Mexican was quick to make his presence known with an early knockdown, putting Onama on an uphill battle situation, but the Ugandan fighter fought his way back into it with craft and help from his athleticism. Number 24, Joshua Ban vs Cody Durden, UFC 310, December 9. Ban shows for the third time on the list, proving every time he fights, the action is guaranteed. Against him was the grindy American wrestler Cody Durden, fresh of a ninja choke submission against Matt Schnell. Durden was aggressive and tried to impose his grappling, but the methodical pressure with which Ban answered with was no joke. And finally, number 25, Felipe Lima vs Miles Jones, UFC Fight Night Covington vs Buckley, December 14. What a debut year for Felipe Lima. After his fight with Naimov, he gets back against fellow bantamweight, but again at featherweight against Miles Jones. Just like on his first fight, Lima is not afraid to show his full arsenal, and Jones wants more than content to scrap with him, looking to land a big shot to end the night. And with that, we get to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you find some interesting fights to watch on this list. Let me know if I missed any particular fight that you liked during the year. What was your favorite fight during the year? Remember to visit the fight site to find all written content. And you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Threads, where I'm usually posting like cool fighting clips and short analysis. Remember that if you can support me on Patreon. You get access to a lot of exclusive content and our Discord server that has a great community. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.